lot of what Alberta deemed common sense legislation is soon to be introduced in this instance of the province's legislative session. When the province was introducing the session, they spent half the time talking about the legislation and the other half smack-talking the Liberals and the void they've left by suspending Parliament. Of course, they also talked about the budget, which was released on Thursday. An Albertan minister has resigned due to the ongoing controversy between Alberta Premier Danielle Smith and the Alberta Health Services regarding their procurement practices. A different minister warned that the Liberals risked having a similar failure with a much greater magnitude to the Green Line LRT with their planned high-speed rail between Toronto and Quebec City. You may have seen the billboard urging Albertans to tell the Premier to join the USA. All that and more on today's episode. My name's Isaac Lamoureux, your host of the show, and let's hop into that first story now. Alberta's legislature reconvened on Tuesday, focusing on introducing what the province is calling common sense legislation, while working to fill the void left by the federal government grinding to a halt due to prorogation. While the legislation has been trickling in slowly, beginning with the budget, of course, introduced on Thursday, and will continue to be introduced throughout the session, we'll discuss the press conference of Government House Leader Joseph Scow introducing the session where he took aim at the feds. While Scow avoided discussing details of specific bills, deferring to upcoming announcements from respective ministers, he did hint that the budget would feature amendments to the Alberta personal income tax. And it did, considering one of the UCP government's key campaign promises, a tax cut, will be implemented in 2025, 2 years ahead of schedule. The provincial government is implementing a new 8% personal tax bracket for income up to $60,000. The tax cut is expected to save individual Albertans up to $750 in 2025. Albertans earning less than $60,000 per year will see their personal income taxes fall by 20%. Albertans are expected to collectively save $1.2 billion in 2025 due to this measure. Yeah, let me know your thoughts about the budget in the comments, especially considering the baseline values provided in the budget assume a 15% tariff on all goods, with 10% tariffs on energy, and forecast a deficit of $5.2 billion in 2025-26, falling in subsequent years. In the low scenario, in the budget, signaling a decline in revenue, 25% tariffs would be put on all Canadian goods, except for energy products, which would see 10% tariffs. If this were to occur, the Alberta government projects a deficit of $8.7 billion in 2025-26, which would still fall in the next 2 years. The high scenario assumes no tariffs, but the looming uncertainty would come with a higher exchange rate volatility, a swing in energy proxies, and disruption to the supply chain. The high scenario also assumes no retaliatory tariffs from Canada, resulting in lower inflation, growth in spending, and more. In this scenario, the province still predicts a deficit of $2.9 billion in 2025-2026, but would almost balance the budget by 2027-28, which would see a deficit of $200 million. But now getting back into our other story, Scow said the legislation will help Albertans cope with the rising cost of living. He emphasized that this upcoming session is extra significant amid global economic uncertainty. He said, quote, "We are in the midst of global uncertainty with geopolitical change and shifting markets, and we are saddled with a federal government that's so focused on internal party politics that they seem to have forgotten their duty to Canadians, forcing provinces to fill the gaps where they have failed." While much of the legislation is focused on directly improving Albertans' living standards, Scow said that Alberta's government will continue to try to ease border and trade tensions with the United States. The province will also work to break down interprovincial trade barriers. He said, quote, "We will continue to enact business-friendly policies that attract investment, continue our work to refocus the healthcare system, and as wildfire season inches closer, we will continue our preparations to protect Albertans and communities from the impacts of wildfires." Scow added that some Liberal cabinet members are finally realizing the importance of an east-west pipeline after denying it for years. The House leader said, quote, "We have a federal government that has been missing in action for quite some time, who has failed to understand or at least failed to respond to the needs of our province. As we see the turmoil and the self-interest happening within the Liberal Party, we're not going to let that distract us from defending Alberta's best interests." Alberta's government unveiled 9 of the approximately 20 pieces of legislation expected in the spring session. The upcoming legislation includes the Automobile Insurance Act, the Financial Statutes Amendment Act, and the Red Tape Reduction Statutes Amendment Act. Alberta Minister of Mental Health and Addiction Dan Williams said that legislation for involuntary treatment for drug addicts is forthcoming. Let's watch that clip here.
As the Premier laid out, our government has done significant work to build a recovery model, now leading the decrease in opioid fatalities across the country with year-over-year of 39% decrease, a 300% higher decrease than any other jurisdiction in Canada. But this is not enough for those who are not able or willing to voluntarily find their way into treatment. We had one individual last year who overdosed 186 times, as was reported by the provincial healthcare numbers. We believe it's likely more often than that, because not every single overdose is reported and tracked for an individual. The last thing that I want to see, or anybody wants to see, is that be one of our family members or friends, and it be 187th time that takes that individual's life. We will not sit back while we watch this happen to Albertans, to our loved ones in our communities, and to loved ones in our family who are suffering from this deadly disease of addiction. Our government has made a commitment to bring forward compassionate intervention, and that legislation is coming soon. It would create a process and a path for a family member, guardian, for healthcare professionals, and for law enforcement or peace officers to intervene and request treatment for somebody who's in addiction or because of their substance use has become a danger to themselves or others. With the highest civil standards, we will move forward with legislation that allows society to care for and intervene for those who are most affected.
The previous legislative session saw lawmakers focus on protecting personal autonomy, property rights, and legal firearm ownership for Albertans. The province also introduced sweeping changes to local election laws last spring. One of the changes will be piloted in the upcoming municipal elections in Edmonton and Calgary, which will introduce political parties at the municipal level. So hopping into our next story here, Alberta's Minister of Infrastructure, Peter Guthrie, resigned from cabinet Tuesday morning, citing concerns over the provincial government's procurement practices and a lack of accountability within Premier Danielle Smith's government. Guthrie announced his resignation in a letter addressed to constituents, stating he had taken steps to address procurement inconsistencies across government departments but found little support from cabinet. He wrote, quote, "In recent months, I have voiced concerns regarding the government of Alberta's procurement practices across all departments. As infrastructure minister, Guthrie said he had insight into procurement processes and had recommended creating a financial oversight committee to review and advise on all major government contracts. He said, quote, "If implemented, such a committee could have been instrumental in preventing some of the issues we are now seeing in Alberta Health and AHS," adding, "Unfortunately, the majority of cabinet does not appear to share my concern." Guthrie said his resignation would allow him to continue holding the government accountable as a private member, emphasizing that Albertans expect fiscal responsibility and transparency. Another thing he wrote was, quote, "It is essential that the public has confidence in its government and its processes. We were elected to be open, transparent, fiscally responsible, and above all, honest with Albertans." Alberta Premier Danielle Smith told True North that she had accepted Guthrie's resignation. Despite resigning as the province's infrastructure minister, Guthrie will remain a UCP MLA for Airdrie Cochrane. He said he looks forward to continuing serving Albertans. His resignation comes amid heightened scrutiny over Alberta Health Services' procurement, which has led to an investigation by Auditor General Doug Wiley. Former AHS CEO Athana Mensapoulos, who was dismissed in January, has launched a $1.7 million wrongful dismissal lawsuit alleging political interference in health contracts. Mensapoulos claims that government officials pressured her to approve contracts for private surgical facilities and that Smith's former chief of staff, Marshall Smith, was involved in the process. The lawsuit also raises concerns over the province's $70 million contract with MH Care Medical, a company that secured a deal to import pain medication from Turkey. Danielle Smith denied any wrongdoing, stating earlier this month that the allegations should be reviewed transparently and expeditiously. She confirmed that her government had requested both an internal AHS review and an independent audit by the Auditor General, while pausing all new surgical facility contracts until the findings are released. She previously said, quote, "As Premier, I was not involved in any wrongdoing. Any insinuation to the contrary is false, baseless, and defamatory." Smith told True North this week that she has also directed her senior civil service to find a third party to investigate what happened with the AHS procurement process independently from the provincial government. She said that she also hopes to determine why AHS never brought any substantive evidence or documentation to the provincial government despite months of requests. She said, quote, "I want to reiterate that I was not involved in these procurement decisions, nor am I aware of any wrongdoing with regards to the issues raised by the former CEO. My actions were straightforward. The government made a policy decision to expand surgical facilities to tackle the critical issue of wait times, and we all trusted that direction would be acted upon and implemented by AHS. Auditor General Doug Wiley previously confirmed that he had begun reviewing the procurement and contracting process at the AHS. His reports will be publicly available after they are tabled in the Legislative Assembly. Let me know in the comments how you think that might unfold. Also on Thursday, Danielle Smith named a new infrastructure minister, that being Martin Long. Now hopping into a story that came out at the end of last week, Alberta's Minister of Transportation, Devin Dreeshen, warned that the federal government could be running headfirst into a failure akin to Calgary's Green Line LRT with the new high-speed rail planned between Toronto and Quebec City. Dreeshen had previously called the Calgary project a, quote, multi-billion-dollar boondoggle. He blamed that project on former Calgary mayor and current provincial NDP leader Naheed Nenshi. Dreeshen wrote in a letter on September 3rd, quote, "To be clear, we recognize your and the current council's efforts to try and salvage the untenable position you've been placed in by the former mayor and his utter failure to competently oversee the planning, design, and implementation of a cost-effective transit plan that could have served hundreds of thousands of Calgarians in the city's southern and northern communities." He said it was encouraging to see the Liberals supporting mega infrastructure projects between provinces, but warned that not enough preparatory work had been done in advance of the announcements. Dreeshen told True North, quote, "The federal government doesn't seem to have done the proper homework for this $80 billion high-speed rail project." When Prime Minister Justin Trudeau announced the project, he said Canada would only invest $3.9 billion over 6 years on top of the $371.8 million provided in Budget 2024. However, according to CBC, Transport Canada said that a high-speed rail between Toronto and Quebec City could actually cost up to $80 billion. Franco Terrazzano, federal director of the Canadian Taxpayers Federation, said, quote, "Trudeau just put taxpayers on the hook for $4 billion for the planning of this boondoggle. How much will this actually cost taxpayers?" Transport Minister Anita Anand couldn't even say how much it would cost. She said the following.
But do you have a rough estimate as to the price tag? I mean, are we talking 15 billion, 100 billion, 200 billion? Like, I think if you want to get buy-in from people, they need to understand just how much this is going to cost, don't you?
Those figures will come, JP. Remember, we have just announced the winning bidder. Right now, that bidder is negotiating a contract with the Crown Corporation, Alto. And once that contract is negotiated and finalized, and the plans for building and laying that track have been drawn up, we will have more to say on the price tag. But again, the option that we're choosing is to proceed prudently and to ensure that we're using taxpayer dollars efficiently. And if we were not doing that, we would not be doing right by the Canadian public. So $3.9 billion to undertake the co-development phase is the right process to take, and then we will come out with how much the building of this project is going to take in the long term. Let's not forget, $35 billion added to the Canadian economy annually as a result of high-speed rail is going to be the finished product and the consequence of undertaking this process overall.
The high-speed rail network named Alto claims on its website that it will save money in 5 key areas. These include reducing greenhouse gas emissions in cars on the road. Even under the best-case scenario, the claimed savings total only $49 billion, roughly half of the projected cost. Trudeau claimed Alto, the largest infrastructure project ever in Canada, will boost GDP by up to $35 billion annually and create over 51,000 jobs. The 1,000-kilometer rail network between Toronto and Quebec City is currently in the consultation phase. The subsequent development phase is expected to last around 5 years. Alto will be made up of different phases, forming a rail network. Each phase is expected to take between 5 and 7 years to build. Yeah, let me know in the comments if you think we'll ever actually see this train built. Calgary's Green Line LRT project was initially promised to be a 46-kilometer line with 29 stations costing $4.65 billion. The project's distance was cut numerous times following that, and it ended up being slashed by 78%. The number of stations fell by more than 75%. Despite these significant reductions in size, the project's costs skyrocketed. Dreeshen said the cuts came because the city council failed to do any of the proper costing, engineering, or planning. At best, it was drawn up on a napkin, he told True North. Dreeshen then had some advice for the feds. He said, quote, "Properly planning first and building quickly after is the key for these type of projects. Despite the problems with Calgary's LRT project, the province has big plans province-wide for passenger rail. The province proposed a commuter rail at the end of April 2024 to connect the province. The rail plan aims to be completed by summer 2025. A 15-year delivery plan will be presented, and the project aims to be completed by 2040. Hopping into our last story today with a quickie, a provocative sign reignited a debate over Alberta's future and fueled backlash from local officials. A bold new billboard in Boden, Alberta is turning heads and stirring controversy. The sign reads, "Tell Danielle, let's join the USA," and features a photo of Premier Danielle Smith with US President Donald Trump. The photo was taken during a recent visit to President Trump's Florida residence in Mar-a-Lago earlier this year. Funded by the America Fund, a group linked to former Wexit Alberta members, the billboard pushes the idea of Alberta breaking away from Canada. Yeah, I thought I saw the billboard in person, but I must have confused it for when I saw it on X because I wasn't around Boden recently. Let me know if you saw the sign though. Local leaders aren't having it. Boden's mayor swiftly distracted the town from the message, saying, quote, "The community is not happy about it in any way, shape, or form." The America Fund argues Alberta would be better off as an American state, blaming Ottawa's policies of blocking pipelines and printing money, causing inflation and the cost of living crisis. Smith said the following about the sign.
I see no enthusiasm for that notion. What I have seen is the opposite. I have seen so many Canadians and Albertans in particular reaching out and saying, we got to put Canada first. We've got to tear down interprovincial trade barriers. We've got to find new markets. We've got to support each other in building new pipeline infrastructure. I've seen a sea change in attitudes across the entire country. I'm very, very encouraged by that. So I don't think there's a lot of enthusiasm for what the billboard says or what the president has been talking about, and that's why I say let's continue to be the U.S.'s best trading partner. Let's continue to be a sovereign nation, and let's get to talking about the things that are going to make us both stronger. I think that there's a real opportunity for us to talk about a North American fortress, that Canada and the U.S. together, we can make sure that we've got energy security, national security, international security, food security, and working in partnership together with building on the kind of trade relationships we've had in the past. I think that that's the pathway forward.
Economic union like the EU?
Well, and talk to anybody in the EU, they don't much love Brussels. So I think that what I do like is that we have built through various phases, whether it was the Auto Pact, followed by Free Trade Agreement, followed by NAFTA, followed by CUSMA. We have a virtually tariff-free relationship with the United States. I think it's something like 99% tariff-free. And so are there ways that we can improve that mobility, buy more goods from the U.S., have them buy more goods from us? I'm open to talking about that. And I hope we can get onto that part of the conversation very soon, because that's a lot more constructive.
Tell me if you agree with Smith or whether she's burying her head in the sand here. The sign has reignited long-standing frustrations over federal control, energy regulations, and equalization payments. Separatist political movements have existed in Alberta since the 1930s and spiked during the 70s when Prime Minister Pierre Trudeau imposed his devastating national energy plan. The movement picked up steam again when Pierre's son Justin Trudeau was elected in 2015. In 2017, he stated that he wanted to phase out the use of Alberta oil sands, and since then has introduced anti-energy legislation, including Bill C-69. Professor Jordan B. Peterson recently wrote in the National Post that Canada has to offer Alberta a better deal than what President Trump is offering. He also said the following.
Enough pathetic celebrity wannabe pandering to the international elites of Davos, and for good measure, the utterly degenerate UN. Enough overt and covert attempt to destroy the basis of the economy of my fair and hardworking province. Enough delaying critical infrastructure development and rejection of international trade offers for natural gas, oil, and coal. Enough treatment of the resource economy upon which Quebec in particular so unacceptably depends as a moral pariah. Enough idiot green moralizing, enough carbon tax, enough bloody net zero. And how about this? Enough multiculturalism and destruction of the Canadian identity. Why belong so expensively to a country that despises its own history, economy, and people? Make us a better offer, and quickly, my Canadian friends, or Trump's tariffs will be the least of your problems.
Are Peterson's concerns more accurate of Albertans' residents' feelings? Let me know in the comments. That wraps up this week's show. My name's Isaac Lamoureux, your host of the Alberta Roundup. Have a great weekend. Thank you and God bless. May Alberta prosper, strong and free.